Hello, everybody. Welcome in live to Athens, Georgia. Once again, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We have a loaded show coming up for you today. We're here in the Classic City because Pro Day is going on. In fact, it's going on right now as we record live in the 10 a.m. hour. It's just behind me in the indoor practice facility. DawgNation will be inside there all day long providing coverage, but we'll also provide you coverage of the start of spring practice, which began yesterday. On today's program, you'll get a chance to hear from Georgia left tackle Andrew Thomas, who talks about why 2019 can be a very big year for him, both in his college legacy and his NFL future. We'll hear from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, and to start things off here in just a moment, we're going to talk to Georgia coach Kirby Smart. We'll hear a few minutes of what he told the media yesterday as he set the stage for the 2019 spring practice. And I want to jump right into this because I think the conversation with Smart's really interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, one of the things that we'll talk about a good bit both today and in the days ahead are the specific definitions that Kirby Smart uses about what constitutes success for his defense this upcoming season. You heard the phrase havoc plays a lot from him and some of the Georgia defensive players, which met with reporters yesterday. The notion of getting more sacks, more tackles for loss, more passes broken up. Smart was very specific and clear about his desire to see more of that from his defense this season. We'll hear from him on that. Smart also addresses the competition going on at wide receiver, as a lot of former Georgia players now on their way to the NFL. There is a lot of spots to be filled in that position group here for this season. Smart's already anticipating an intense competition for that, and he foreshadows a bit about what we'll see this summer when Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens, two players he doesn't mention by name, but does mention the idea. Kind of an interesting note from Smart on that. However, the thing that I believe is probably maybe it didn't get enough attention yesterday when Smart initially spoke, but probably will get a lot of attention from Georgia fans going forward. There is a pocket of Georgia fans who is hoping, I think, to hear some words from Kirby Smart that they didn't necessarily hear. In fact, I think they probably heard the opposite of that. Now, Kirby Smart's an incredibly popular coach with good reason, but one of the ideas that Smart seems to possess that's not necessarily popular with a unanimous number of Georgia fans is his belief that the offense that Jim Chaney ran in 2018, the one before that in 2017, maybe even 2016, was the right offense for Georgia. Because let's face it, we do this show live every day on a number of video channels. We see a lot of video commenters, including even people who reach out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. There is certainly a significant number of Georgia fans who say, with the changeover from Jim Chaney, many of which Dog fans have said, good riddance, glad to have him in Knoxville, Tennessee now, and bringing in, promoting up, I guess it's probably better to say, James Cole in that role of offensive coordinator, that this is a good chance to do some things differently. This is a good chance to add some new wrinkles in the offense, and for a lot of Georgia fans, that means throwing the ball more and maybe to a certain extent being a little more up-tempo on a game-to-game basis than some of what Jim Chaney did before. In fact, even when Mike Griffith was in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine just a couple of weeks ago, a number of former Georgia players predicted that was indeed what would happen when it comes to James Coley's new offense in place of Jim Chaney. But when you hear Kirby Smart in a question from DawgNation's own Chip Towers discuss the coordinators, I don't necessarily think you get the impression, or you will get the impression, that Smart was in any way unhappy with the way that Chaney did run the offense, nor is he expecting a whole lot of new stuff necessarily from James Coley. I took what Smart had to say yesterday as the belief that the Georgia offense is fine the way that it is, and certainly statistically, there's a strong case to be made that is indeed the case. So let you hear from Kirby Smart now on a number of subjects, and we'll talk about what he had to say and more of what Georgia players had to say. It's a fun day live in Athens here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoyed Georgia coach Kirby Smart right now.
A couple things we want to establish this spring. We want to increase our havoc rate on defense. That's one of the main target areas. We want to be more disruptive. And the only way you're going to be more disruptive is practice being disruptive. So we've got to do that. We've got to create more lost yardage plays, more negative situations, and something we've really harped on. We've done studies on the top 10 teams last year in havoc, and we're trying to do some of the things they do, and we're trying to put guys in positions to do that. Offensively, we've got some holes to fill, especially at the receiver spot and some at the running back spot and tight end spot. So we're excited about the challenges. I'm really excited about seeing the new wideouts go out and compete and play. And unfortunately, there are no early guys in at that position, so we'll get to see a lot of them in fall camp. But there's a lot of guys who've been here that haven't had an opportunity to really go out and play at the forefront and being thrust to the forefront. So that's a big position of need for us, and we're going to get to watch those guys compete. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Hey, Kirby, you talk about the holes to fill offensively. Can you talk about how you attack that with the late signing period and grad transfer market?
Yeah, I'm not really allowed to comment on the grad transfer market because nothing's done. You know, they're not signed, they're not physically here yet, so we can't comment on those guys. But the two guys we picked up late in the signing process with Brett and George, we certainly think are very high caliber players. We knew a lot about both of them. You know, George is a guy that fit what we did. He really was intrigued by the fact that we had the guys come out early, and he knew that he fit in our style system. And we think he's a talented player that we're looking forward to working with. And Brett's a guy that really came on the radar late, was kind of a late bloomer, had a really good senior year, a really good athlete. I mean, I like the fact that he played both ways on his tape. Extremely competitive. Was able to watch him work out during the recruiting process in January, and he's just impressive physically and a competitor. And they're both at positions of need. You know, you wish they were here now, but the way college football works with guys getting here in early June, you know, they'll have 2 months of really good work to build up. So whether or not they'll be able to contribute this year, I don't know that we know that. I think we're going to try to find that out with the guys we've got here on our roster right now in the spring.
Coach, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your changes on your coaching staff. Obviously, new coordinators, and 3 new coordinators technically, and just wondering if those were a result of, extensive worldwide searches, or you knew what you wanted to do and kind of from the outset, this is kind of what you had your mind on.
Well, I don't think you ever know exactly what you want to do. You're always being prepared as a coach. You know guys get opportunities. I've known for quite a while that Mel Tucker was going to do a tremendous job as a head coach. I mean, he was a guy that I was able to lean on, especially early in this process. I think first I'd say congratulations to Mel and Jim, but also thank them for what they help us build thus far. They're both tremendous assets. They were really great guys, great team players. And bought into the whole organization. So, but when it comes to Dan, Glenn, sharing that responsibility with Dan being the coordinator, and then Coley, who's been a coordinator, and I've known James Coley for a long time, got a lot of respect for him. You know, he worked with Jimbo for a long time, had an opportunity to go with Jimbo the year before. So, and really, at the end of the day, when you have coordinators on offense and you have 2 guys that are doing it like Jim and James did, they shared a lot of that responsibility, and a lot of that responsibility will be passed down now with Dale and Cortez being involved. And I've had a lot of confidence in Dan and Glenn even last year. You know, not everybody knows what goes on behind the scenes, and I think that's okay that not everybody knows that. But as a head coach, you're in all these meetings, you're in all these decisions. You know how much involved Dan Lanning and Glenn Schumann are in the game planning process. Mel will tell you he leans on those guys heavily, so I have a lot of confidence in those 2 guys, which is why they've been hired.
Interesting stuff there from Georgia coach Kirby Smart as we're live here in Athens, Georgia. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, also on video every single morning at 10 a.m., normally from our DawgNation World Headquarters studios in Atlanta. Today from just outside the athletic complex here in Athens, where behind me as we record live, Pro Day is taking place for a lot of former Georgia players on their way to the NFL, and we're looking forward to providing coverage all day long of that big event at DawgNation.com, including the DawgNation video channels. We're also on the radio every day at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Love being here in person in the Classic City today, but on the radio in Athens every afternoon as well. And, of course, podcast form. And we know on days like this, the podcast is a little different than the format that you're used to. So to our podcast audience, we appreciate your tolerance of that. It's fun to present this coverage to you from Athens here today. I'm going to let you hear from another Georgia player coming up in just a moment. Let me take a moment, though, as we go around the doghouse right now, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, to react a bit to what Kirby Smart just had to say there. And I'm curious, now that you've heard Smart, do you agree with my assessment on the subject of the offensive coordinator in particular? There are a lot of Georgia fans that just flat out don't like Jim Chaney, and I don't think, based on what Smart had to say there, I don't think you put him in that camp. I don't believe that Smart saw anything wrong with the Chaney offense over the course of the last couple of years based on what he said there. Now, before the show began, Connor Riley, our on-site producer, said, yeah, but B.A., what do you expect a coach to say in that moment? I think there are plenty of coaches that use the changeover at coordinator as a chance to have some spin control, basically, for how things are going to be different going forward. I think Ed Orgeron at LSU is an example of that. It seems like he's talking about rebooting the offense literally every offseason. But Smart didn't do that. I believe one of the big reasons that Smart chose James Coley as his offensive coordinator is because of his ability, given the fact that he's been on staff here, to take the baton and basically maintain and keep in place what has been working for Georgia the last couple of seasons. And personally, my belief is that's the right decision. I would not have wanted a big overhaul with the Georgia offense this offseason. I believe that Georgia's got a plan in place that's put it close to winning a national championship. It's big offensive linemen. It's great running backs. It's a quarterback who makes good decisions on top of that. That's the recipe that Georgia's choosing to use, and it's got them to a national championship game at the end of the 2017 season. Had them with an eyelash of beating Alabama this past December, and I believe that it's also the appropriate recipe to give it a shot in 2019 as well. There's obviously no guarantee it's all going to work out, but the decision-making process that Smart has made up to this point, the folks he's trusted his offense to, I think for the most part it's working. Not every Georgia fan agrees with that, but it's interesting to hear Smart's thoughts on that. We'll actually have more on this coming up in just a couple of moments when we hear from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. But for now, as Around the Doghouse, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, continues, I want to go back to something else that Smart had to say off the top of the clip that we just heard. His challenge to the Georgia defense. He talks about havoc plays. Now, Georgia safety J.R. Reid also met with the media a bit yesterday, and after Smart went on and on about being in the backfield more, being more active as a defense, it became a source of curiosity of exactly what does Smart mean when he talks about havoc plays. Well, Georgia safety J.R. Reid talked about that and a whole lot more. He also gets into the challenge of replacing DeAndre Baker. He talks about what new defensive backs coach Charlton Warren brings to the table. But the subject that's on the minds of a lot of people for a Georgia defense that's been good the last couple of years, but maybe not quite as active as some fans would have liked, how is that going to be different this year? You just heard Kirby Smart's thoughts on that. Take a listen to J.R. Reid here on DawgNation Daily right now.
I definitely think we'll bring a lot more energy. That's definitely with a younger staff. I think we're going to create a lot more turnovers and a lot more havoc plays, more sacks and tackle for loss. I definitely see that happening.
What do you mean by a havoc play? Kind of break that down for us. Kirby Smart mentioned it earlier. I want to know what your take is on a havoc play.
We want to get TFL, sacks, PBUs, turnovers, interceptions, any way to just create havoc on the offense to negative plays. We want to make it happen.
We were talking to John Ledbetter at the Combine. He said towards about halfway through the season, Kirby Smart came to the defense and said, you guys need to affect the quarterback more. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I remember him telling the D-line that we got to get to the quarterback, and he kind of let him get loose a little bit. I definitely think that's why our sacks kind of picked up towards the end of the season.
What went into your decision to return, and how lengthy of a process was that, and how much did you talk to family and whatnot?
I mean, it was 100%, talk to my family throughout the whole process. It took me a minute to figure out what I wanted to do. Definitely weighed our pros and cons, and then talked to Coach Smart, and I told him I wanted to come back and win a national championship.
You talk about generating more havoc plays, pass rush in particular. Do you envision that being more, hey, four guys rush, they just do a better job of getting the quarterback, or maybe sending an extra pass rush as a way of getting back there?
Now, whatever we can do to get back there is what we're going to do. Whatever the game plan is that week, it might be four guys is enough, or maybe we might need 5, 6 guys to get back there. Whatever we can do to create havoc and make the offense frustrated and create turnovers is what we're going to do.
What have you picked up so far from Charlton Warren?
Very disciplined. You got to be very structured, and that's one of the things he comes in and he has preached to us on the secondary. He doesn't want anyone to be any late. He don't want anything to be out of order. He's very detailed. Since he's from a military background, as you guys know, he's very detailed, and it's always the details that matters.
Stuff there from Georgia safety J.R. Reid, and I think it's really interesting the way that Reid has emerged as a real leader for Georgia. By now, his story's been told a bunch. He was not a player that necessarily came to the Bulldogs with a ton of fanfare, a Tulsa transfer, as many of you are aware, he was thought to be kind of the player to be named later in the D'Angelo Gibbs recruitment, his familiar relationship with Gibbs, their cousins, and that's one of the reasons why Reid was thought to be coming to the Georgia roster to make Gibbs feel more comfortable in Athens. As it turns out, Gibbs never really found a home here, and now he's on his way to the University of Tennessee. J.R. Reid has become one of the most pivotal players of the Georgia defense. It's one of the things that we all love about college football. You just never know how some of this kind of stuff is going to play out, but it's certainly fun to watch it play out. I also think that J.R. Reid had some really interesting things to say right there, and I want to break down some of that. Before I do, let me wrap up our Around the Doghouse here today, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You know, many times these days you're going around your house and you're kind of doing some spring cleaning, getting it ready for the warm weather season, and you notice some stuff that doesn't look too good. You may see a crack on the foundation on the outside. You may see like a damp spot down there in the floor in your basement. Makes you a little nervous, but the key is you got to act right now, act fast, get that taken care of, because what you're going to find out is it's a lot easier to fix than you might think, especially when you trust my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They are the only foundation repair company the DawgNation would trust, because they're the only ones that have a full-time engineer on staff. And the best news of all, they are really easy to get in contact with. The phone number could not be more easy to remember. It's 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. And somebody really smart from Engineered Solutions of Georgia is going to get in touch with you and help you out, and everything's going to be great after that. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, let me pause for a moment for our radio audience on 960 The Ref and let you know we'll have plenty more DawgNation Daily coming up right after this. And back here live from Athens on video, podcast, radio, everything in between. It is DawgNation Daily today, and it's great to have you here. Let me take a brief moment to explain, once again, what we're doing, why we're here, and then over the course of the next few minutes, before we're done today, you'll hear from Andrew Thomas, but over the course of the next few minutes, a chance to talk to Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, some of his thoughts about what we addressed off the top of the program, how the Georgia offense might be a little different this year with a new offensive coordinator, James Coley, instead of Jim Chaney. Jake Fromm had some interesting things to say about that. He also addressed his time at the NFL Scouting Combine and what he learned from that. You may remember the ESPN story from a few days ago suggesting that he, Tua Tagovailoa, Andrew Thomas, some other well-known college players were on hand for that, kind of a symposium of sorts. He talks a bit about that. We'll also address more of what J.R. Reid had to say a couple of moments ago on our program. But we are here for Pro Day today. It is the event that's sort of like a mini combine just for the players from Georgia. As I'm doing this live, just about a little after 10 a.m., we've already had a lot of the workout portion, and by that I mean the weight room portion. We've had the bench press take place. Some of the weight-related drills go on. Guys will be coming into the indoor facility. They'll do their sprints in there. There'll be some individual player-type work there. And really, for a lot of these guys, it's a chance to either cement what scouts already think about them or make their step up for an even higher draft positioning than before. And for a lot of these Georgia guys, seemingly they are in really good shape with where they might be drafted. I think some of them probably feel very good about their status right now. There are probably a couple of others who maybe didn't have the NFL scouting combines they would have liked to have had, hoping to do a little better today. And so we'll bring you coverage of how they do perform at DawgNation.com. And for me, since I like college football so much more than the NFL anyway, a lot of this also always goes back to how does all of this impact recruiting? And I think sometimes it's hard to draw the straight line between, okay, you send this guy to the pros and then you get this recruit. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to sort of say how one directly affects the other, but we know that it can't hurt. And as Georgia becomes a pipeline to the NFL, clearly that would seem to go along with the pipeline of elite five-star talent that's coming to Georgia on a regular basis. With that in mind, before we get back to the content we were discussing, I thought our buddy Connor Riley had a really good point that if you saw social media yesterday, Alabama had its pro day. And you may have seen Patriots coach Bill Belichick walking around with his Alabama sweatshirt on. Connor said to me before the show that he thinks that Saban asked him to wear the sweatshirt. I 1,000,000% think that's the case. I think Belichick's probably the kind of guy that probably just would do that as a favor to Saban for whatever reason. Who knows how much information Saban may have given Belichick over the years about various things. But to me, and listen, maybe I'm reading too much into this. I think from time to time I am probably pretty guilty of doing that. But doesn't this seem like a direct response to what Belichick said about Kirby Smart during the Super Bowl about how Georgia was so great at preparing guys for the NFL. Saban can't let that last without some sort of response. And so maybe seeing Belichick in the crimson and white yesterday was his response to Belichick's words of praise for Kirby Smart back in the lead up towards the Super Bowl. Anyway, kind of an interesting thing to think about. And we will certainly look forward to seeing a lot of DawgNation coverage of Pro Day today. In fact, one more thing to tell you about real quick. We actually have a special edition of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger live from Athens here today as well. Jeff Sintel going to be on hand. One of the things we'll get into there is how all of this does impact recruiting. Jeff will help us connect the dots on that as we stay in Athens for the afternoon to do Before the Hedges a little bit later on. But with all that said, before we hear from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, let me go back and address a little bit of what J.R. Reid had to say a moment ago. If you're either joining us late on video or podcast or a radio form, one of the things that got talked about a lot yesterday was the idea that Kirby Smart wants more havoc plays. Now, Bill Connolly's a statistician from footballstudyhall.com. I reference him from time to time on this show just because I think even if I'm not smart at math and don't know how a lot of these stats get tabulated, I do think the math guys are kind of interesting with the predictions they make. And the havoc rate is a stat that he's talked about, and he's defined it as sacks and tackles for loss and pass breakups. That's been a big part of his formula that he's used now for a number of years, and that's what Smart meant when he addressed that yesterday. Now, statistically speaking, Georgia was not good in this regard a year ago, creating havoc plays just 15.6% of the time. That's just 75th best in the country, according to the stats that Conley has at Football Outsiders and footballstudyhall.com. That's obviously not good enough for a team like Georgia that wants to win the national championship. By the way, we're just getting some late news here. Belichick is here at Pro Day not wearing UGA colors. So I don't know if you score that as a victory for Alabama here or what, but not wearing UGA colors today during the UGA Pro Day. But nonetheless, back to the point of the havoc plays. I haven't heard from a single Georgia fan this entire offseason. I've heard from a lot of them. I haven't heard from a single one that doesn't say, I want to see more sacks. I want to see more tackles for loss. I want to see a more aggressive defense in general. Now, a couple of things that I really like here. First of all, I love the idea of Kirby Smart being really specific about what he wants from his defense. According to Jonathan Ledbetter from the NFL Scouting Combine, Smart was already specific with his own players behind the scenes on that near the end of last season. Now he's going public for the entire world to hear. We're going to define defense this year by how many times that we wreak havoc in a backfield. How many times do we get back there, and how many times do we cause a major disruption, a lot of trouble for the opponent we're playing. It's not just enough to keep teams off the scoreboard. We want the kinds of plays that potentially change possessions or potentially change the tone and tenor of a game. I love that level of specificity from Smart. I don't know that you always see that from every coach in every instance. There's, in some cases, a misinformation campaign out there that quarterback pressures are just as important as sacks, and I simply don't believe that's true. I believe you've got to get the quarterback to the ground, or in the case of tackles for loss, the ball carrier to the ground. I believe you've got to do that to be an elite defense. I think Alabama and Clemson and teams that have been in the college football playoff conversation have shown us that. And it sounds like in 2019, Kirby Smart's not going to accept anything less than that. I think that's good news. Also, something that I thought was an important point with J.R. Reid. Now, Reid's answer on this wasn't incredibly specific or necessarily insightful, but I do think the crux of this discussion ends up being this. It's the last question you heard me ask Reid a moment ago, for those of you who've been with us for the entirety of the show. When you talk about quarterback pressure, when you talk about being in the backfield more, there are a couple of ways to do that. Smart's addressed this in the past. You have 4 pass rushers. They just do a better job of getting to the backfield, getting off their block, and getting to the quarterback. Or you send the extra pass rusher. Let's face it, one of those extra pass rushers could eventually be a Reid on a safety blitz or something like that. And I posed the question to him of, which one do you want to see Georgia do? Now, Reid said, hey, we want to be able to do either one. We want to be able to do whatever the coaches ask us to do. And that's probably about what you'd expect a player to say in that situation. I don't expect him to give away the entirety of the defensive game plan, nor do I expect the new defensive coordinator, Dan Lanning, and I guess the co-defensive coordinator, Glenn Schumann, nor do I expect them to be remarkably different from a philosophical standpoint than what Mel Tucker was before. I mean, after all, you heard Kirby Smart also say that a moment ago, too, that these guys were already influential in the defensive game plan. Don't assume it's going to be that big of a change. Here's what I do think you hope for. I think you hope for more guys that do what DeAndre Walker was able to do for Georgia a year ago. Walker was one of those guys that could beat his block. He could beat his man. He could get into the backfield. He could be kind of a one-man pass rush. I think one of the things that kept Georgia from being just below that national championship threshold a year ago was I don't know in the pass rush in the front seven there was really anyone that necessarily complemented DeAndre Walker all that well. There wasn't someone on the other side that was doing his job as well as Walker was doing his. In 2019, there's a big reason to think that may be different. Whether you focus in on the new coming players, the junior college transfer Jermaine Johnson, the incoming freshman Nolan Smith, one of the most highly regarded recruits of the entire country the last year. Connor wrote about him yesterday at DawgNation.com. Or you may think about the 2018 signees, guys like, Adam Anderson, sporting a new number, by the way, Brenton Cox, Azeez Ojulari, who we saw a little bit of in the Sugar Bowl. There's no shortage of potential names that could create more of these havoc plays and increase Georgia's so-called havoc rate. No shortage of what might be able to do that. But I believe you want to do that more with your four-person pass rush, more so than you want to do that with having to send the extra guy in. Because if you send the extra pass rusher, all of a sudden, in exchange for trying to get better at something that you weren't great at a year ago, all of a sudden you sacrifice potentially something that you were really good at a season ago. Georgia was essentially at the very top of the country in terms of fewest big plays allowed. If you're blitzing, you can't have it both ways. If you're sending someone from your back four into the, or I should say from your back seven into the pass rush situation, you do open yourself up more at that point for big plays. And that's a choice that I hope Georgia's not forced to make. I hope that Georgia is able to go after the quarterback and get into the backfield with more of just a four-person pass rush. And I do think as we head towards the start of the season, that's going to be a really important conversation to have. All right, let me here on DawgNation Daily now shift the conversation back to the offensive side for a moment, because we did get a chance to hear from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm yesterday. And the thing that you're going to hear off the top from Fromm is what it was like to be in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine. As we've said before, Fromm's mere presence at that event, this so-called symposium to prepare likely future NFL very high draft picks for what life in the pros is going to be like, is a bit of an endorsement for Fromm as potentially the kind of guy that could leave Georgia after this season. Now, Fromm's obviously non-committal on that, but it certainly speaks to why 2019 is such a pivotal year for Fromm. And as he goes into his third year as a starter, he does so now with a new offensive coordinator. Just how different does he expect things to be? Well, he talked about that a bit yesterday, and I want to give you a chance to hear from him. He is unquestionably the face of this team now, the undoubted starter at quarterback, and the guy that brings a load of experience for a team that hopes to win the national championship here in 2019. How does he feel on the day that campaign begins? Here's what he had to say about that yesterday.
There, but it was a great learning experience. Super thankful for that, and hopefully to take as much information from it as can and learn from it.
Did it affect any way that you're actually looking at the NFL? You're like, hey, this next year could be me.
Yeah, I mean,
2 years. Did it affect your thought process in any way?
Yeah, a little bit. I can't necessarily hone down specifically exactly what thing, but it just definitely opens my eyes, gives me a different perspective about, what's going on, how that transition takes place. And I guess it makes me a little more familiar with it when the time comes.
Jay, talk about the story programs that are coming into Athens this year. You got Notre Dame coming in, you have Texas A&M. Just growing up, was that playing against those types of teams? Is that every boy's dream? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you're at this level playing this kind of football, you want to play the best teams possible you can. And I think we're going to get our heavy dose of that next year. We're excited for it. We know what's laid ahead for us. So we just have to go to work this spring, this summer, and this fall. But yes, that is what you look forward to. You look forward to playing these big games, especially at home, which is a blessing for us. Playing at home in front of these fans, it's unbelievable. So we're thankful for that, and can't wait.
Some of the Georgia players that were at the Combine suggested that maybe the new James Coley offense might look a little different. There might be some new wrinkles. What do you expect from that? How different do you think what Coley does with his play calling could be different from what Chaney did the last couple of years?
Yeah. Coach Coley, he's an awesome, high energy guy. He's going to bring a lot into that room, the entire offensive unit meetings, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be different, and I can't wait for it. It's going to be slightly different passing concepts, but not really. We're just going to do slightly different things, and I think that really could be all the difference. And we have the weapons on offense. As long as we use them in the right manner, we'll be fine. So I'm excited for it. I don't know exactly how different, what exactly is going to change. But I think when you click on the tape, you'll be able to see, maybe more explosive, maybe more fluid, and hopefully, we can do well with that.
So really interesting stuff from Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm there. Love his insight on how he thinks things might be a little different with James Coley's offensive coordinator. By the way, I'm Brandon Adams. We're live in Athens as Georgia Pro Day is going on today, and spring practice got underway yesterday. We're bringing you coverage of that here on DawgNation Daily today. And don't forget, we'll have Before the Hedges presented by Kroger from Athens a bit later on. And as Fromm talks about the offense and the new look under Coley, or the potential for some new wrinkles and some new differences with Coley now as the offensive coordinator, I'll also invite you to check out a piece that Mike Griffith wrote at DawgNation.com yesterday, which features a quote from Kirby Smart talking about his definition of what the word balance means when it comes to an offense, that to him, balance is not 50-50, half as many half running plays, half passing plays. His definition of balance, as he explained it yesterday, was, can you run it when you need to? Can you throw it when you need to? And for a lot of Georgia fans, they're going to like that. Obviously, the heritage of great running backs at Georgia is something that makes a lot of people really, really proud. I guess the only thing with that I might somewhat mince words with is, instead of saying, can Georgia throw it when it has to, what I wish for this Georgia team here this season is you could take it in a direction of, can Georgia throw it when it has an opportunity to? Because one of the things I think you've seen from the teams that have performed the best in the college football playoff the last couple of years, and let's face it, there aren't that many teams over the course of the last 4 years that even won a playoff game. Clemson and Alabama have won a lot. What you've seen from these programs is a desire to look for opportunities to go for the home run throw, look for opportunities to add a big-time passing play in the arsenal. And for me, that's the difference between those teams that have won recent national championships like Clemson and Alabama, and a team like Georgia that's gotten very close but hasn't quite gotten over that hump yet. I don't think it's as simple as saying, hey, throw it when you have to, because that almost comes across as, don't throw it unless you have to. And frankly, while I never want to see Georgia become a pass-happy offense, that doesn't feel potentially like you're maximizing all the weapons that you have in your arsenal and all the opportunities you have for your offense. So I am going to be watching this very closely. I thought that Smart was really open and candid about the wide receiver competition. He said he expects to get a lot of questions on that. You heard from him at one brief moment saying he almost wishes that the receivers that are coming in the summer, he's referencing Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens, he wishes they were here right now to go through this competition. That would seem to lead me to believe that both those guys have a chance to be in the mix for some early playing time this year. It should be a fun scenario to watch, and I look forward to hearing Fromm's thoughts more as the season gets ready to progress. Let me take one more pause here for our radio audience on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Let you know there's more DawgNation Daily coming up right after this. And indeed, we are live here on video, radio podcast for DawgNation Daily here today, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to get a chance to hear from Georgia left tackle Andrew Thomas. And there's a couple of interesting things that Thomas gets into in our discussion. I want to make sure you hear those. He talks about the big challenge that Kirby Smart gave him a year ago and how he feels like he's doing with that right now. And there's something else that Thomas has to say. And, I'm at times probably guilty of, as I said before, reading too much into things. I did notice, and Connor Riley, who's here with me, I don't know if you felt the same way that I did. Andrew Thomas did not completely shake off the idea of, hey, this could be his last year at Georgia, and he has a chance to be a very high draft pick next year. That thought has clearly occurred to him, and I don't fault him for saying what he said yesterday. He seems to be aware of just how big of an opportunity stands in front of him. And I appreciated that candor from Andrew Thomas yesterday on that subject. We'll give you a chance to hear that from him in his own words coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you that you got big savings coming up right now for March Madness with your friends at Kroger. How about some great stuff on fresh Purdue chicken wings or 2-liter bottles of Coke or Pepsi, vegetable trays, and a whole lot more. A lot of you are having big-time parties coming up on Thursday and Friday. Some of you are laying out of work for the start of the NCAA tournament. Well, don't forget your local Atlanta Kroger's got you taken care of with some great deals on some great stuff. Those Purdue chicken wings, great for a party. The Coke, the Pepsi, the 2 liters, all also really good stuff. So please check out your local Kroger for a lot more on that. And by the way, speaking of the tournament, you still got a little bit of time left. The link is still there for you on the top of the page at DawgNation.com. You can get into our DawgNation bracket challenge, our bracket contest, and be a part of that. This is just for fun. Our buddy BJ, kind of our boss here at DawgNation, has agreed to do a DawgNation prize pack. So it's actually going to be some really cool stuff. I've been told maybe some of the golf shirts, things like that, are going to be in there. It's going to be a really, really fun giveaway for the person who does win. We'll also do T-shirts for the top 10 finishers in our bracket contest. And you can go to DawgNation.com. You can find the link. We'll do a lot of the updates and stuff like this on the forum at forum.DawgNation.com. So please be a part of that with us. It's just for fun. It's the kind of thing we can kind of bust each other's chops over. I know Mike Griffith has agreed to be a part of it. I'm assuming Chip Towers, Jeff Santel going to do that as well. And in fact, I'm going to make sure they do that. Connor Riley's done his. I've already filled out my bracket, by the way. And my bracket's already not looking so great. I had a Temple going into the Sweet 16. They lost last night, but listen, y'all don't care about that. The point is, it's a lot of fun to gather around and talk about the tournament this time of year, so please be a part of our DawgNation tournament contest. There's a link for that there at DawgNation.com. On a much more serious subject for our audience, though, the start of 2019 spring practice, which includes a guy in a very significant role this season, Andrew Thomas, who I don't know if y'all feel the same way that I do. It feels like for a lot of these guys from that 2017 class that their career is just going by in just a blaze. I mean, it seems like it wasn't 5 minutes ago that Thomas and his high school teammate at the time, Trey Blunt, were with us at a Marlowe's Tavern talking about coming to Georgia, arriving, and the recruiting process, and now we're using the phrase NFL draft in the same sentence with Andrew Thomas. It's amazing how fast this career is going, but the one thing that no one can deny, in the time that Thomas has been on campus, he has been nothing but a model citizen. He was a starter from the word go. He was a trusted player on the field. You know, in addition to just occupying a starting spot, he was really one of the bedrocks of the Georgia offensive line in 2017. As a right tackle then went to the college football playoff. He's a left tackle now. And given his status as a really good player and given his just demeanor overall, Kirby Smart has always seen a bit of a leadership potential in Thomas, a quality that can make him a great leader. You may remember this past off season, heading into the 2018 season, Smart was very vocal about his desire to see Thomas not just be a leader by example on the field, but a vocal leader challenging other players to be better, challenging other players to fulfill their utmost potential. Does that come easily for Thomas, and how has that process been going? In addition to Thomas's thoughts about one day being a first-round pick in the NFL draft, he was very open about the challenge of becoming a leader when in some respects standing up and speaking in front of a bunch of people, maybe that's not the most natural thing, but Thomas knows that's what this Georgia team needs. I loved this from Andrew Thomas. He is quite likely the best player on this entire roster, and he spoke to reporters yesterday. Here's a taste of what he had to say.
It was difficult at first, I would say, because I'm more of a quiet person. So that was an adjustment for me at first. Like last year was more of like a leading by example type of thing, but this year I'm stepping into like a more vocal leadership role this year.
Did you have that responsibility in high school?
Yeah, I did a little bit. It was a little bit of both me and Jamari, being like the older guys on the team, like my junior and senior year, being a leader.
Are you comfortable dealing with all of this?
I am. Yeah, I am.
Can they hear you when you say something?
They definitely can, yeah.
What's it like to replace Lamont there in the middle? I mean, he's obviously such a good center, and that's, the offensive line has high expectations. Right. What's the challenge of finding the new guy in the middle going to be like?
It's a big task. The center is a very important job, but we have some talented guys. Trey's doing really well right now. We'll see going to practice how he does, but we have a lot of vets around him, so whoever takes the spot, I think they'll be okay.
How will Coley being the OC affect the offensive line?
The offensive line, I don't think it will change much. It's the same attitude. Like, we want to be physical, we want to be dominant, protect the quarterback.
What did you think of your time up in Indianapolis?
It was a great time. It was a little eye-opening. I learned a lot of things about like financial literacy and things like that I didn't know like much about, like as far as like NFL contracts. Like once you get your contract, they take 42% off, like right off the bat. I didn't even realize that, and things like that. Just understanding how being a professional is.
What's one thing you took away from that you just really surprised you?
That and it's really a business. Like, you have to come to work every day. Like, every day they're trying to replace you, so you have to build your game every day.
freshman year, you were at right tackle, then you moved to left tackle. Do you feel like you're settling in at left tackle after a year?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty set at left tackle. The transition was, I think, pretty smooth, so I'm pretty set.
Your name's going to be mentioned a lot in draft conversations next year. How much do you think you'll allow yourself to pay attention to that when it comes up?
I try not to pay too much attention to it. I feel like it's just a distraction. I can't, be complacent. I got to continue to work because that's the only way I can get to where I want to be.
So really good stuff there from Georgia left tackle Andrew Thomas speaking to reporters there. And, I just think that Thomas is a very, very, first of all, interesting young man. He's made himself into a great player very early in his career. And I think if you're talking about Georgia getting to where it wants to go here this season, I think that Andrew Thomas is a big part of that. In fact, let me take a couple comments on Thomas here just for a moment. Al Birchfield calls Thomas a gentle giant in the comment section. And if you've ever met Thomas, had the pleasure of speaking to him, he is one of these guys that, to be so big and could be as mean as he wanted to, could be as scary as he wanted to be, Thomas does come across as an incredibly nice guy. And for someone who can be a bit soft-spoken, as he said before, speaking up and speaking loud in front of a locker room full of players or meeting room full of players, maybe that doesn't necessarily come naturally. But one of the things I've always believed is that football is a bit different than other sports where, if you watch, say, the Atlanta Braves, for instance, I'm a big Braves fan. They bring back Brian McCann this year, a guy that's very much at the end of his professional career, but they bring him back for leadership. In baseball, you don't have to play a ton to be a leader. I don't know that McCann plays a ton for the Braves this season. Maybe he will. I don't know that he will. But they bring him back to be a leader. I think NBA teams have that. Football is different, though. Football, it seems like your leadership only comes from good players. There's a certain level of credibility required to step up and tell other players what they should do. You better be proving it on the field. Otherwise, you're not going to have very many people want to listen to you in a locker room. Ultimately, I think that's what hurt Tim Tebow as a potential leader. As good as his leadership qualities are, he wasn't good enough to demand the respect from his NFL teammates. Well, Andrew Thomas doesn't have that problem. So Thomas may be soft-spoken, and he may not say a ton, but for a guy like that who does choose his words carefully, I think his words carry extra weight. So he's one of those guys that when he speaks softly, people shut up and lean in and listen closely to hear what he has to say. And I do think that's one of the things that makes his leadership potential very, very impressive. Robert Barnes also said something kind of interesting a moment ago in our Facebook comment section as well, talking about how, listen, it's fun to talk about the NFL drafts, and who may be going early and what may be going on there. And that's obviously kind of a hot topic today because Pro Day is going on and a lot of this stuff's taking place even now as we're speaking. We're going to head inside the indoor facility as soon as we're done here on DawgNation Daily to see a whole lot more of that. He says, but don't forget the main goal. This team's got a lot to accomplish in 2019. He says it all starts with winning the SEC East. And Robert, I think that's an interesting comment. I'm glad you made it in our Facebook comment section here today. And don't forget, for those of you watching on video, we'll have the R.S. Andrews cool down coming up in a few minutes and take a lot more of your comments live from Athens. But, Robert, I think the important thing to remember is one of the cool things about football as well is this is not one of those examples where I think the individual goals necessarily conflict with the team goals all that much. You heard Thomas a moment ago speaking about the potential future of being a first-round pick in the NFL draft. The more he grows into that role, the more I think it benefits UGA. The same can be said for Jake Fromm. Last week on our program, Mike Griffith said he thought it was about 50-50. Would Fromm stay or would Fromm go? I am certainly not wishing Fromm out the door, not even anything close to that. But if Fromm were to play well enough this year where that becomes a possibility, that's probably really good news for the on-field results for Georgia in terms of what you mentioned, winning the East and all the dominoes that could potentially fall after that as well. I'm going to tell you, showing up on campus today and walking over to our broadcast position here just outside the Vince Dooley Athletic Complex, I thought it was a really cool thing to see all the familiar faces that I recognize from either NFL TV coverage or NFL front offices or just people that work for NFL organizations. You clearly got the sense that Georgia's kind of the place to be in the football world today, and you don't get that without a bunch of future NFL stars on your previous roster or on future rosters. You create that kind of buzz. And the great news is, as those guys come through Georgia on their way to the NFL, they have a really good penchant for making Georgia very good on the field, too. So that's an exciting thing to think about. As Kirby Smart said yesterday, it's a great time to be a dog, both with football, the spring sports doing well, and for a lot of these guys who will make big names for themselves starting with the NFL draft coming up in April. I'm going to get ready to wrap up DawgNation Daily right now for our radio audience and our podcast audience. We'll stay here live on video for R.S. Andrews and have plenty of your questions and comments on Facebook and YouTube. And we're back this afternoon for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Have a great morning, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you soon right here on the DawgNation video channels. And for those of you still on video with us right now, thanks for hanging around as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making all of this possible. In fact, hope you'll check them out online at rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. Now, I told you yesterday we didn't need any extra air. We had all the air we needed. Today, I came prepared. I've got like 3 layers on right now. I wore a hat to keep my hair blowing all over the place. I'm actually a little disappointed. It's nowhere near as windy yesterday as it was. In fact, I almost feel like I could strip off all these layers, minus, just down to my regular shirt. I think I'd be fine. If I had not put my hat on, I don't think it'd be blowing around quite as much as it was. Now I'm going to have hat hair all day long, because you can't walk around indoors with the hat on. I'm going to have hat hair all day long, and the attempt to prevent the wind-blown thing yesterday. But I went back and watched some of the video from yesterday when I got home yesterday, and I was like, oh, my gosh, my hair is flying all over the place. I look like Gary Busey at one point in time. So I did not want that to happen today, so I brought the hat with me. And by the way, if you can see here, this is the Gator Hater hat from our friends at Onward Reserve, the Bulldog chomping on that gator. I love this hat from our friends at Onward Reserve, and it's always a fun thing to wear that. So a good time. All right, let me get some Facebook comments here, and I'll let Connor switch with you in a moment, and I'll get some YouTube comments. Then after that, we'll be on our way in for the rest of the Pro Day stuff. Gerald Harmon says, take the hat off. Listen, y'all ain't getting me to do that. As weird as my hair looked yesterday, I've got like the worst hat hair in the world. I don't really know why. I feel like a lot of times you see like the baseball players and the golfers, they take their hat off and it looks like normal. I don't understand how some people have good hat hair. My hat hair is the worst there ever was. Trent Scarborough says weatherman hair. Yeah, not outdoors though, unfortunately. Joey Fogler on the subject of guys sitting out the bowl game a year ago. He says if it's not the national title game, I don't blame them for sitting out. And Joey, I think that's probably the new normal when it comes to college football. Derek Tillman says, I'd be glad to change place with you. I don't care how cold it is. Yeah, listen, the cold's not bothering me. I just look ridiculous. So I'm having a great time. I just feel like when I see myself on video, I kind of look ridiculous after the fact. So I get that. I could not have been happier to spend the day here yesterday, get a chance to come back and do that again today. This is a really fun and special time. Philip Sharp says, looking good in the hat. I appreciate that. If I could get away with it, I think I'd almost wear a hat every single day, especially as my my hair gets grayer and grayer and grayer. Miriam Martin Corbin also says she has terrible hat hair, too. Well, I'm glad to know that we're together on that, Miriam. I appreciate that. James Crump likes the hat as well. Yeah, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is like the old-school Georgia logo biting down on the gator. I believe this is, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, this is the logo for the Jacksonville Bulldog Club, I believe. And our friends at Onward Reserve make these hats, and I love this thing. Love it. Jimmy Hoskins asks a good question. He says, is there any way for us fans to view Pro Day at Georgia? We're going to get some video in a moment. We'll put that on the DawgNation video channels. Connor, is there any UGA TV? I know Alabama did have some TV coverage yesterday, right? No TV coverage for that today? I'm surprised. It feels like the NFL Network televises everything these days. So I guess no TV for this, but we'll have some video, and we'll put that up on the DawgNation video channels, including hopefully some of that stuff for Before the Hedges later on this afternoon. Jennifer Caldwell-Sperlin says, how was DeJuan Mathis yesterday? Connor, did you see much from Mathis? What would be your review on him yesterday? Yeah, it was a short window of viewing, so I heard some chatter from some fans that maybe he'd create a little bit of a buzz, but I didn't personally get to see Mathis. In fact, I had to leave. I didn't stay for practice yesterday. My son had a school thing, but Connor was there. Shannon Baker also says, I'm curious to see how Mathis does. I thought what Kirby said in his press conference yesterday was kind of interesting. I mean, not unexpected necessarily, but the way that he and Bennett are going to divide that up. I guess I was interested and that question came up really early in the press conference yesterday. So clearly there's a lot of curiosity about how the backup quarterback position is going to play out. And I'm like some of you, if Mathis could unseat who I believe is the point spread favorite, Stetson Bennett right now, I think that would be kind of an interesting scenario. I've told you before, I wouldn't hesitate for 2 minutes burning his red shirt this season if he had a chance to be better than Bennett and be the backup quarterback. I think given the fact that Bennett knows the offense, it's not easy for Mathis to do that, but because of the athleticism he possesses, there's a chance that could be the case. Richard Smith likes the hat as well. I'm glad to hear that. Eric Ray says, I look ridiculous in cold or warm weather. Yeah, listen, Eric, I can't do anything but the face that God gave me. I can only try to keep the wind from blowing me too bad, but I know where you're coming from on that. Matt Rukavina says, I just turned 36, and I still need a hat everywhere I go. Yeah, Matt, I'm right there with you on that. Philip Sharp also says that he thinks the NFL Network will probably show some highlights tonight and might have a Baker or Ridley interview. Yeah, I would expect to see that, and we'll try to have as much video as we can in the DawgNation video channels as well. Yeah, I'll do some YouTube comments. Let me get one more from Yarnell Color about how I've got old school values and a gentleman aren't supposed to wear a hat indoors. Yeah, it always bothered me when you'd see Les Miles coaching in a dome with the hat on. I always felt like that was a violation of that policy. All right, let me hop over YouTube for a moment, and then we're going to get out of here, kind of semi on time today so we can get into the indoor facility and see some of this stuff. Kelly Burnett on YouTube says he sees DeAndre Swift leading the way at running back with Harrion and Cook breaking out. I think that's a very, very worthwhile prediction. Obviously, that kind of ties into what Smart said a bit yesterday about kind of taking things a little easy with Zamir White right now. I think part of that is just on the basis of there's no need to rush. I guess if we don't see as much from White as we saw from Chubb in 2016, is that going to worry you at all, Connor? Connor says no. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing a little play polish drill before it's all said and done, kind of a surprise. What do you think the difference is? Because the White injury was not as severe. I guess it happened later. Is that probably the deal on that?
No, White's injury was in August.
Yeah, but that's right. Yeah, you're right. The Chubb injury would have been less. That's right. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Connor says just to be careful with him. That's probably a fair point. GB2 says, BA, is there any real threat to UGA not winning the East in 2019? And does Bama have a backup quarterback? We need to know. Those are both great questions. On the subject of the East, you may have seen yesterday that the online betting house Bet Online released what they call some of their games of the year, which is an early look ahead to some of the point spreads. And in the Bet Online release, Georgia was only a 4-point favorite over Florida. I think that's absurd. I think that's ridiculous. I do not believe that game will be a 4-point spread when Georgia plays. I think that's a 7, 8, 9-point spread when that game is played. That game is not within a touchdown. I personally don't believe, and I'm going to talk about this a lot, I personally don't believe that anybody in the East is close to being able to compete with Georgia. Now you'll say, well, BA, you're a Gator hater. You got the hat on. You can take that with a grain of salt if you want. You're certainly free not to believe my opinion on this, but I believe there is some empirical data when you go position for position and look at some of the issues that Florida's dealing with. We talk about the offensive line. I think you can ask some major questions about quarterback. I'm not quite sure who's going to be the, leading the way for Florida running the football. 2020, it may be a different story. But that point in time, maybe there's Georgia attrition for whatever reason. Maybe Florida recruits better somehow, take advantage of Florida State, Miami still being a little bit down. Maybe it gets better then. I don't believe the East is up for grabs in 2019. I don't. I think for Georgia, that's won every league or every division game the last 2 years by 14 or more points. That still carries a lot of weight for me when it comes to the upcoming season. Now, as far as Alabama and the SEC West, the SEC Championship, that's obviously a stiff challenge. I'd love to be able to tell you that I know with great certainty that Georgia wins that game. At this point in time, I can't say that yet. I think it's about a fair fight. And in a 50-50 game, anything can happen. And we've seen the breaks not go Georgia's way the last couple of years. I think it's a very similar type of game in 2019 if they play. Another game where it could be very, very close to the end, and Georgia tries to make those final plays to get over the hump. As far as the backup quarterback situation for Alabama goes, I'm presuming Mac Jones will end up being the primary backup to Tua Tagovailoa this year, and we'll find out how good Jones is. It was a real luxury for Alabama a couple of years ago in the Tua class. They signed Jones. Jones was a one-time Kentucky commit, and he was from the Bowl School, which is a pretty prestigious program in like the Jacksonville area, Florida. He was pretty good recruit as a primary backup, even though he hasn't played a ton. It's probably a lot worse than some other programs would do. So I think, and I know he played pretty well in their A-Day game a year ago, I think. I think Alabama probably feels like they have a decent backup quarterback situation, at least as we define that in 2019, where very few quarterbacks want to hang around programs where they're not playing. Mac Jones at Alabama is about as good as anybody has, maybe. K9 Blues asks a good question on YouTube. He says, BA, is the football buzz in full swing yet? Does it feel, quote, back to you yet? Being here, it does. If I'm driving around Atlanta, I don't know if you get the same kind of thing right now, but here in Athens, I got to tell you, football felt back yesterday. Seeing, Kirby Smart, running around and seeing these Georgia players getting on the practice field yesterday, I got to tell you, football kind of felt back yesterday to me. So that was a really fun thing to be a part of, for sure. Cliff Payne, the subject of Jake Fromm, about the offense he ran in high school. It makes perfect sense to use. I think he's talking about the hurry-up situation. Perfect sense to use it more, but hopefully Smart recognizes the mistake in not using it more. In terms of Smart recognizing mistakes in the previous regime's offense, I didn't get that. I mean, I didn't get that yesterday. And for me, there were a few things that Smart said that flew under the radar, and for me, that was one of them. There are a lot of. I'm going to use a bigger word than I should. I couldn't spell this word, but I know how to say it. I think a lot of people were hoping to hear some sort of repudiation of Jim Chaney from Kirby Smart. Y'all, I think that we got to come to grips with the fact that Kirby Smart liked the offense that Jim Chaney was running. The lack of hurry up, the lack of big passing plays, the heavy imbalance in favor of the run. I think we got to admit that's what Kirby Smart wants. I believe he believes that's a recipe for a national championship. Now, for me, I'm kind of okay with that. But talking to many of you every day as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down, I get the impression that some of y'all are kind of not. Some of y'all want – I think there's even a pocket of Georgia fans who wants to still believe that Jim Chaney was fired. He wasn't. Now, I don't believe that Georgia thought he was worth $1.5 million, whatever he's making. But Jim Chaney was – I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that Chaney was fired. Kirby Smart's a spin doctor. Kirby Smart likes to control narratives. If he had any reason to believe that, or if he had any opportunity to suggest that they were tired of Chaney and wanted him gone, obviously he loved throwing dirt on Tennessee in that regard. He doesn't do that. I think that Smart was happy with Chaney, and I think he's looking for Coley to do more of what Chaney did. And I think the response by fans to that point is going to be really interesting. Let me do a couple comments and we'll get off the air. I'll also bring Connor Riley in here for a moment as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Kelly Burnett says the SEC West is going to be a lot tougher this year. Yeah, we heard Tony Barnhart say that last week on the show, that if you're looking for challenges in the division, that Alabama, according to Tony, might be facing a stiffer challenge in the West than Georgia faced in the East, and I don't think that Tony's wrong for saying that. Let me do one or two more. Daniel Moore asked, what did Akil Crumpton do in the 40? Do we know Crumpton's 40 time? I haven't heard that. He actually had a pretty good, for his size, he had a pretty good bench rep, right? Did he do 12 reps on the bench? Somebody asked me a moment ago how many reps I could do. Of 225 these days, you think I could do 2? Yeah, it's 0 now. No, listen. Now, there was a time in my life I could do a few 225 reps. But at this day and age, it'd take me 5 total reps to add up to 225 pounds, I'm afraid. Eric Rio says Kentucky takes a step back. Tennessee takes a step forward. I don't know how noticeable that Tennessee step forward is going to be, though. And he says Gators in South Carolina will do more of the same, and well, the rest of the East will do slightly better, slightly worse. Yeah, the one team you got to watch for a little bit is Missouri, with Bryant, who you think of as a competent quarterback. Derek Dooley, who actually proved himself to be a better offensive coordinator than I would have guessed. Watch out for them just a little bit. Crystal Chrissy says, do you think the players that are injured will be clear for the summer and fall camp? I can't think of an obvious name that won't be. I did think it was really interesting yesterday to hear Julian Rochester's name coming up on that. That was new news to me. I'm assuming that was news to everybody. I did not know Rochester was dealing with an injury. Him not going through spring practice was a little eye-opening for me, just given the pivotal nature of his role on this team this season. But to go back to your question, I don't see any reason why he or anybody else who's hurt should be in any real danger for the upcoming summer camp and the fall after that. Before we go, here's part of R.S. Andrews cool down. Let me bring Connor Riley on for a moment. And Connor Riley, let me begin with what I started the show with today. What do you think of, to me, feels like a little bit of a divide? Now, all Georgia fans like Kirby Smart, but not all Georgia fans like his view of the offense. What do you make of that?
I think for the fans who wanted to see, him say something about Chaney yesterday or sort of reprimand or say this isn't the offense we want to run, that's just not who Kirby Smart is. He's not going to throw a coach under the bus who he liked. I mean, he was paying him a good amount of money, and, the offense was, maybe not as successful as fans wanted, but it was still a good, competent offense for a majority of the time. Now, in key moments, could it have been better? Certainly. But I don't get this whole, Chaney's guys, so now Kirby has to throw him under the bus. Just to quote Frozen, just let it go. Just let it go and move on. You've got James Coley as your offensive coordinator now. Jake Fromm sounded very excited about the opportunity to get to work under him. So it'll be a slightly different offense, I like to think. A little quicker, maybe a little bit more involving the tight ends based on Coley's time at Miami. So just move on from Jim Chaney. Just forget about him.
Two quick things to address here for those of us, and this show has certainly, if you name check Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens, we've talked about both those names 10,000 times. I feel like yesterday was kind of a sneaky good day for the pro-Pickens, pro-Blaylock camp. The fact that Kirby Smart came very close to saying, goodness gracious, I wish those guys were here right now, that leads me to believe that both Blaylock and Pickens have a chance to be contributors this fall.
Absolutely. I will go ahead and say point blank, I think Kirby wishes that Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens were already here. Now, we know Pickens has some work to do in the classroom as far as getting here, but as I wrote this morning, they wouldn't have taken him in the first place if they didn't think he was going to be able to do that. And, his quote is very telling. I think he really likes what Pickens says. He wasn't prompted to talk about him. He kind of just brought him up naturally. And so that makes me think that Kirby is excited about seeing what kind of wide receiver talent both Pickens and Blaylock are going to be when they arrive.
And then last thing, and we'll get ready to wrap up our RS Andrews cool down after this. How much do you love the idea that Kirby's putting some specific parameters around what success for this defense looks like this year? It's not enough to say, hey, we won the game, that's all that matters. He's saying, no, we got to affect quarterbacks. We got to tackle ball carriers in the backfield. We've got to wreak havoc. I love the idea that Kirby's being that specific before the season began.
Yeah, I think that's sort of him admitting that, the 2018 defense maybe wasn't up to what he wanted it to be.
In this regard, the 2017 defense wasn't that great either.
There wasn't a great discrepancy in terms of sack totals between the 2017 team and the 2018 team. But now, as those outside linebackers, start to get a little bit older, the Brenton Coxes, Ezra Jalares, Adam Anderson, as you bring in a Jermaine Johnson, Nolan Smith. I saw all those guys at practice yesterday. I mean, they're the most physically impressive guys on the team. If they can sort of turn that into production, I think that's going to make Kirby Smart and this defense very, very happy in 2019.
I apologize for getting off the air a little earlier than we have been. We need to get inside the indoor facility so we can see some of Pro Day, RS Andrews Cool Down. Check them out online, rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. I'll also tell you for our podcast audience and our video audience, tomorrow we're back to normal, DawgNation World Headquarters Studios. So the show the way you've come to expect it, back in its normal format tomorrow. For now, though, thanks for being a part of this show live from Athens here today. We'll see you back this afternoon for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Y'all have a great day, and isn't it fun to have spring football back? We'll talk to you later on.